Hey, Nima. So, as we were just joking earlier, Trump said, not only said the war is over, he's declared victory as well. So, you know, the Strait of Hormuz is victoriously closed. Iran, the supreme leader's victorious name is still Khamenei. Um, Now, obviously, jokes aside, him declaring victory and declaring the war is over is just political, uh, just playing political games to be able to start the war again, having that 60-day clock restart if he wants to start a war without congressional approval. But just him calling it a victory, his rhetoric recently, what do you make of it? What do you make of the blockade that is happening right now, the military buildup that is happening, the rhetoric that's coming out of Iran, and the fact that Iran is offered a concession yesterday? They said, look, we're happy, according to the Wall Street Journal, we're happy to do a deal, to discuss the nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz and to discuss the Strait of Hormuz and the sanctions, even if you don't lift the blockade. And apparently Trump was unsatisfied with that offer, which came as a surprise to me. Would love to get your general thoughts on things.
You know, the reason that Iran has said that, has offered that, because the blockade is not the blockade as Donald Trump is trying to sell it to the American people and to us here in the West, in the Latin America, in Northern America, in Europe, because he's telling us that the blockade is just putting a lot of pressure on Iran. That's why they're trying to get out of this conflict. But that's not the reality. The reality is that the Iranian economy knows how to deal with these little problems. That's a little, just is not even comparable with the regime of sanctions for many years. And looking at the Iranian economy today, I think many people should understand that Donald Trump did this, tried this before. You know, you remember in his first term when he simply withdrew from JCPOA. In those days, Iran was exporting something like more than 2 million barrels a day. It's a 2.5 million barrels a day. And Donald Trump withdrew from JCPOA and drastically changed from 2018 to 2020, drastically changed the number of the barrels exported by Iran a day. It reduced to 400,000. Just imagine, from 2.5 million coming down to 400,000 barrels a day. It was, that was the peak. And look at the situation right now. It's not anywhere close to what it was before. And I don't know how Donald Trump is feeling that the situation has changed and it's putting a lot of pressure on the Iranian economy. Yeah, the Iranian economy has been under tremendous sanctions and economic pressure for such a long time. But the economy knows how to deal with that. Does it mean that there is no inflation in Iran? No, there is inflation in Iran. Does it mean that the Iranian people are not suffering from these sanctions? No, they're suffering from these sanctions. The economy is suffering. Everything is suffering in Iran. But they know how to observe this sort of suffering for a long-term gain on the part of Iranian people, on the part of Iran as a country. And the blockade, the reason that Donald Trump is not happy, because the blockade is fake. The blockade is not there. What have they achieved so far with the blockade? I would say less than 5%, 2% of the export and imports of Iran.
So you don't think the Iranian economy, because there's conflicting reports. Al Jazeera says Iran could sustain this for 2 to 3 months. Other reports, other sources, Axios put out a report yesterday as well that Iran has about 2 weeks of storage capacity left before they run out of storage capacity. They have to shut down their wells. There's also satellite imagery of them starting to deploy their old ships to be able to hold oil on the sea as a floating reserve, because they're running out of reserves on the ground. And there's no other alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz. If they can ship out a bit of oil through Pakistan, but very limited. There's no ground facilities, logistics to be able to ship out oil. There's logistics. There's roads to be able to bring cargo in and ship out cargo, but not oil. Now you're saying that the blockade itself is not working. So if the Strait of Hormuz was closed, then maybe the Iranian economy would be suffering a lot more. But the blockade itself is not working. And that one as well, I'm getting conflicting reports, because on one side we are seeing cargo ships go through, especially ones sailing very close to the Pakistani coast, so away from international waters. I'm sure you've seen that as well. But it's still, the amount seems to be a lot less than what it was prior to the blockade. From the information that you have, how long could Iran sustain the blockade? And if the blockade isn't working, why was Iran so adamant for so long for the blockade to be lifted? They're like, we will not negotiate anything until the blockade is lifted. Even Professor Fuad, who I'm sure you've had on the show, Fuad Izadi, he said, Mario, the Iranian military is considering militarily breaking through the blockade. Why would these considerations be there if the blockade is not working?
Because it's about the Iranian dignity when it comes to breaking
That's what
the
he
blockade.
said. That's exactly what he said. I asked him the question. He said, Mario, it's about dignity. That's what Fuad said.
Yeah. It's not about the pressure that this blockade is bringing to Iranian economy. If Iran decides to break down the blockade or just confront the United States, it's all about the political gain and how Iranian people wants to maintain their dignity. But when it comes to the reality, before this war started, Mario, Iran was totally prepared for this war. It doesn't mean that they got Iran by surprise, because both sides were preparing for this war. It's not just about Iran preparing, because they were talking about it long before the war happening. So Iran has learned a lot during the 12-day war in 2025, June 2025, and they have been preparing for that. Before this war started, the tankers or the Hark Island, the oil they had on Hark Island was less than, the capacity was less than, they were not all, filled with oil. It was something like 40% or 50%, because they knew that something of that sort, something like blockade would happen, or maybe they tried to attack the Hark Island. They were prepared for that. And they thought, before this war started, they thought that in the first day of war, the United States would implement the blockade. So it's not something that got them by surprise. They knew that. And that's why the blockade is not working. I think if something happens, it's going to be Iran confronting militarily, because Donald Trump, the game you've just mentioned, that Donald Trump said the war is over. But what are those signs? The United States is sending a lot of weapons to Israel, to the region. We've learned about hypersonic missiles being sent to the region. These are not, these hypersonic missile, this whole technology is, the United States is behind Russia, China, Iran when it comes to the hypersonic missiles.
You're talking about the Dark Eagle one they're deploying. There's only like 8 or 12 of them. And it is shocking to me. I've just spoken to so many experts about this, just for people that don't know, about how the US doesn't have hypersonic missiles. It's just mind-boggling to me. And why are they deploying them? Larry Johnson yesterday told me, he's like, Mario, this is because it's coming to the season where Pentagon is going to get a new request for a budget. So when I'm deploying these hypersonic missiles, will allow them to add that to the request for the Pentagon, for the defense budget. So it's more, it's not for military purposes, but it's more for the ability to be able to get more money from taxpayers, American taxpayers.
This is the business for the military industrial complex of the United States, and they have been preparing. How many can they produce per month? As they reported, they can produce 1 per month right now. Just one. And each one costs something like more than $40 million. Oh,
wow.
More than $40 million. And so what is that logic? This is the problem that the United States is facing. They're not there to fight a war of attrition. That was the fragility that they've seen with the case of Ukraine. The war in Ukraine was lost because the whole West, all of the NATO countries together, they couldn't produce. They couldn't outproduce Russian military-industrial complex. That was the reality in Ukraine, and the same is happening right now with the case of Iran and the United States together with Israel. The latest reports show how the United States is running out of cruise missiles, interceptors, And we've seen the reports on CNN just yesterday came out. We've been talking about this, the American bases for such a long time. But right now they're talking about CNN just 2 days ago, 3 days ago, they started talking about, what has happened so far to American bases in GCC countries. This is the reality on the ground. And I don't see Donald Trump being able to improve that, because it's not just about the shortage in the stockpile. It's about how you can replace these shortages when it comes to the, cruise missiles, interceptors. They need rare earth minerals, which literally comes from China. And China is not happy with the concept of providing them to the United States. This is the complexity that Donald Trump has created for himself in the Middle East with this nonsense worth choice.
I want to add more context. So yes, the Dark Eagle, they can only make one, maximum two, but about one a month, $40 million a unit. I thought it was 15. The Russian one, the Kinzhal, is $4 to $10 million a unit. And the Zircon is $5 to $6 million a unit. And they could do dozens per year. That's Russia. We're talking about hypersonic missiles. And China could do, they cost $10 to $20 million. There's different versions of them, the DF-17 and 27. So significantly cheaper. And the hypersonic missile capacity to produce is hundreds per year for mass saturation. So they're going with volume, which works in today's warfare. So that's what Nima's brought up now is a very good point, is that the US is deploying the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to the region. Only 12 of them around. Now, there's two explanations on why. Number one is to request more money from the Pentagon as part of the defense budget. And the second one is because Iran has, if we're back to war, which is the opposite of what Trump said, that the war is over, but we know that's political. If we go back to war, that theoretically that would allow the US to destroy what Iran has even deeper underground, because there's a lot that hasn't been destroyed. So maybe if they are preparing for warfare again, that would be their way to destroy, or hopefully to destroy, Iran's missile launchers deep underground. From what you're seeing, Nima, and everyone you're speaking to on your show, would you say that a return to kinetic warfare is likely, or what would you give it out of 10 in terms of likelihood?
I think that Donald Trump has deployed these hypersonic missiles to the Middle East to test them underground, to test them in Iran, because they have been preparing these hypersonic missiles to show them, or to intimidate China, or to fight China even. So they're sending them, both. Ukraine was serving so far for NATO as a, experiment, because they've used all of their air defense systems, everything in Ukraine. Patriot system, everything in Ukraine, but they didn't use the THAAD system, if you remember. The THAAD air defense system was used just with the case of Israel before this war started, or during the war. And they didn't show any sort of capability so far against Iranian missiles. They have been able to hit Iranian missiles who are older, from the older generations, but the THAAD system is a kinetic system. It doesn't explode. It goes and hit the target and explodes the target. That's the main reason. And the THAAD system is so expensive as well. Yeah. Look at today, and it's their stockpile with interceptors is less than 10% right now with the THAAD system.
You think they're saying it's 50?
System.
They're saying it's 50. You think it's all the way, the munition stockpiles are 10% of what?
Yeah, it's less than 10% with the THAAD system. It's so, yeah, this is, I think that's why Donald Trump, the reality is forcing Donald Trump into, some sort of, he's backing down because of the reality, because of the stockpile, because of the numbers. But what he denies to accept is, what did the United States achieve so far with this war? The United States has failed to understand the reality of the Middle East. And they forced that sort of misunderstanding on GCC countries as well, unfortunately. And that the reality was, Mario, the war, just getting back to the Iran-Iraq war, what was that? What was the main reason of that? Who was supporting Iraq in that war? And what was the outcome of that war till today? What was that? They gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use them against Iran. Then they accused Saddam Hussein of having chemical weapons to invade Iraq and destroy him. And just guess what they did so far. They helped. Saddam Hussein was the enemy of the region, I would say, because he attacked Iran, he attacked Kuwait, he attacked everybody in the region. But the United States decided to go in Iraq because of Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu saw Saddam Hussein as the worst enemy of Israel. So he said, first Iraq, then Iran, and we're going to be okay. And Syria and other countries, Libya, they're going to be on the list, but let's start with Iraq. If you go there, if you do something, that's going to change the whole region. But guess what has happened so far? What was the outcome for this war that has happened on February 28th? In the initial days of war, Iraqi people were fighting together with Iranians against the United States. So did they learn anything from the Middle East so far? What was the gain for them? And what is the gain for the region? Who's helping the region? Nobody cares about the region, because as we talk today, they're able to force their misunderstanding on GCC countries. That's not right for the region. I think we need a greater sort of communication in the region to understand the reality of the United States and what has been the outcome of those destructive policies so far.
What do you make of Mujtaba Khamenei's speech 2 days ago? Because he's doubled down on the foundation of the Iranian Revolution, but more importantly, he's doubling down on making Iran or reaffirming Iran as a global, not a regional superpower at the least, if not a global one. He's talking about Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, or what he calls the Persian Gulf. He talks about Iran offering security for Gulf countries rather than the US, talking about US bases not being needed in the region. I think these are the main statements. Calls the Iranian Islamic Revolution the turning point that ended foreign domination in the region. Goes back to the Gulf's historic defender, Iran being the Gulf's historic defender against Portugal and the British colonialists. And then he declares America's presence the most important cause of insecurity in the Gulf. And most importantly is what I said earlier. He talks about new management of the Strait of Hormuz. First, do you think he means it? And second, do you think the global community, not just the US, the global community and the Gulf would accept that new reality? And lastly, what would that new reality look like? I understand that we're talking about coexistence with the Gulf, and I think that's necessary. But also the Gulf would see this as a threat. Maybe not today, but a threat maybe 5 years from now, a new leader. So whenever a country has a superpower on its borders, especially one that doesn't get along with it, even if it gets along with it, it's always perceived as a potential threat. Russia, China, India, Pakistan, etc. So how would the Gulf countries, how could they build deterrence against Iran becoming a regional superpower?
I think Iran has shown the behavior of Iran as a country in recent years, or maybe in the aftermath of the revolution, because the concept that you're talking about, the Mujtaba Khamenei, he's right now the leader of Iran. When he talks about, I think everything he said, he really means it. He's not just putting out rhetoric, because it's not this way as we've seen with the case of Donald Trump. The leader of Iran just speaking whatever he feels and thinks, and it's the strategy of Iran. They're not making, some sort of rhetorics. This is the reality and the way they're thinking. The second point is how does Iran see the region? And Iran wants the region without the United States. Iran doesn't see any outcome, any positive point of the United States being in these countries, because just getting back to Iran-Iraq war, after the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait. Kuwait was supporting Saddam Hussein, giving tons of dollars to Saddam Hussein in his fight against Iran. But Iran backed Kuwait. Did Iran respond the same way? backing Saddam Hussein or being somehow neutral in favor of Saddam Hussein. No, this is not the reality. This is what has happened. I'm talking about the actions of the Iranian state, Iranian government. They supported Kuwaiti government against Saddam Hussein. And if tomorrow you see that in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Kuwait, all of these GCC countries, Oman, all of them together, if you see the same attitude, if they understand that the neighborhood should be without a threat against the other countries, Iran cannot threaten the security of Saudi Arabia as long as Saudi Arabia is not a threat to Iran. What is the main point of having American bases in Saudi Arabia and Qatar? What is that? What was that? What was the outcome of that so far? Did they support Saudi Arabia? They have paid everything in those bases. What was the benefit for them so far? Nothing. And they use Saudi Arabia to attack Iran. They use Qatar to attack Iran.
I'll give you a counter argument to this. One counter argument would be the US bases have offered security for the region. Now, I know you can easily question this in this war because Iran attacked the countries that had a US base. But for decades, Iran did not attack those countries. No one attacked those countries because they did have very limited attacks, the Houthis, because one reason could be because of the US bases, and that defense that the US has offered them has allowed these countries to flourish, the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi. So I'm not saying it's a solution. It could also be a problem. The UAE, for example, is looking for Israel as building a relationship with Israel to deter Iranian growth. Also looking at China. The Crown Prince was in China. That's for the UAE. Saudis looking at Turkey, looking at Pakistan. I think the UAE could be looking at India as well. So these Gulf countries are looking for alliances in the region to offer deterrence against Iran. But when I spoke to the former advisor to the president in the UAE last week, he said to me, Mario, we're doubling down on the relationship with the US because it is a deterrent to Iran, but it's also not the only solution. We cannot solely depend on it. So it's a tricky position for these countries because they were attacked significantly by Iran. The UAE was attacked more than any other nation. I understand the reasoning behind it. They do have, they've normalized relations with Israel. That could be one reason. They do have an American presence here. But the US has much bigger presence in Bahrain, Qatar, for example, and these countries were not attacked as much as the UAE. Bahrain has a relationship with Israel. It wasn't attacked as much as the UAE. So countries like the UAE and the others, I think they should, and hopefully they will, but I think they should improve relations with Iran and forgive what's happened. I think it's necessary for the region, but also they should also be a deterrence to ensure Iran does not attack them again for whatever reason. Even if Iran says we don't have a reason to attack you, we can coexist. In politics, words enough, rhetoric enough is not enough to offer security.
When you talk about the security, the American bases are improving the security of the region. Against whom? Who's threatening the security? Who's going to attack them? Who? Just mention that. One single enemy of the region that would attack them, that the American bases would help them.
It's not an enemy that would, it's an enemy that could in the future, and it could be Iran. Maybe Iran under new leadership in 10 years' time would be a lot more powerful. Let's say the war now ends, Trump walks away, Iran will start, has the sanctions are removed, maybe as part of a deal. Iran could become much more powerful than it is today, and it could be perceived as a threat. An ally, yes, but it could also become a threat under a new leader that has ambitions beyond what the current supreme leader or the last supreme leader had. So there's always a possibility.
But Iran didn't attack them. They used, the United States and Israel used these bases to attack Iran. Iran didn't attack them.
True. I'm saying a future Iran maybe has different geopolitical ambitions than the current one.
But we cannot make our strategy based on the reality, based on some sort of assumptions. That doesn't make sense. Because if that goes this way, you can say that the United States should attack China because China maybe get aggressive in the near future, because they're not aggressive right now militarily, but they can get that way. So let's assume the United States has to attack China as soon as possible. This is not the reality of the international relations, because these governments have dignity. They have mutual understanding. They've been talking to each other. It's not just about Iran is not a rogue country to decide about its strategy each and every minute, changing it. Iran knows what it wants. Iran wants a better region. In those days that Iran was exporting 400,000 barrels a day, many of these GCC countries were sending 7 million barrels a day. So Iran, and many people were arguing in Iran, if the sanctions are against us when we cannot use the Strait of Hormuz, how can you let GCC countries use the Strait of Hormuz? So that has changed. Iran is understanding, the Iranian leadership is understanding the reality of the region. And as long as the GCC countries continue with this sort of mindset that the United States would help the region, because the problem, Mario, is not the United States, to be honest. The United States can be in the region and can be a constructive force in the region, can help the region. But the United States is not alone. The United States is pursuing the Israeli agenda in the region. This is the problem.
Yeah, so I think Gulf countries will diversify. When I spoke to the advisor, he said we started diversifying even before this war. We had deals with different European countries, defense deals, and he also gave the example of the Crown Prince visiting China. So diversification is necessary, and we've seen as well the weakness of the U.S. defense systems as well. We saw the destruction yesterday in the CNN report. But Iran attacked Qatar and attacked Oman. If there is in the future a new war between the US and Iran, for whatever reason that the Gulf countries don't have a say in, okay? When I asked Professor Izadi, why did they attack the UAE so much more than other countries? It can't just be the Israeli relationship or just be the American presence, because, again, more presence in other Gulf countries. And he said, Mario, another reason, we agreed on that point, is that there's a lot more Western interests, business interests in that country, in the UAE, which can be targeted. So let's say in 10 years' time, there's a new war between Iran and the US. And let's say the UAE doesn't have US military presence here, or very limited, and that's not offensive in nature. How does the UAE know that a new leader in Iran, a new supreme leader, or maybe the current supreme leader, won't do the same thing again, attack the UAE again as a way to damage Western interests here in their asymmetric warfare strategy, as has happened so far this year? So the countries like the UAE, and I'm using the UAE as an example because they were attacked the most, and they've been the most active, the Israeli relationship, pulling out of OPEC, visit to China. But how can they guarantee security, especially if the US pulls out?
The first point, that Iran didn't attack Oman. Oman was some tanker. One tanker was attacked when it was close to Oman, and it was part of in the initial days of the war, it was part of the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz
as well.
Yeah,
remember the video of the port getting attacked? Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, because the ship was at the port. That's why the problem that Iran has never, Iran doesn't want, Iran consider Oman as a friendly country, and that has been the reality for such a long time. But when it comes to the case of the UAE, you have to consider the other point is how Iran is just witnessing, observing the region, which country was used the most to attack Iran. I think that was the basis of the attacks. And they were responding to the points. They were, their assessment is showing that they're attacking from UAE. They're attacking these, for example, these fighter jets are, in the UAE or in Kuwait, that was the basis of these attacks. And the second point would be that one that you mentioned, how the global economy can suffer through these attacks on UAE. And I think what is the problem with the UAE, since you live there, is UAE. The question for the security of UAE right now would be why have they, run out of cash so far? The 40 days of war, it's nothing. How is that possible? A country running out of cash. Is that the security? is that is there any sort of strategy on their part? There is no strategy, Mario, in GCC countries. If there was some strategies, Iran was communicating with GCC countries for such a long time, more than 40 years, I would say, that they said since the Iran-Iraq war, because Iran saw what has happened with the case of Iraq, said they're gonna do it again and again. The whole concept of producing and developing missiles and drones was that the outcome of the Iraq war. And IRGC was the outcome of the Iran-Iraq war. These are institutions that were created as the outcome of the war of aggression, American war of aggression, through a proxy like Iraq against Iran in the initial days of the revolution. So Iran was communicating with GCC countries. Are you going to continue with the same concept? Are you going to facilitate the attack on Iranian soil? The concept is this, Mario, the greater Israel. The greater Israel, the only enemy of the greater Israel would be Iran. Put Iran aside. Imagine Iran doesn't exist in that region. Tomorrow, Israel decides to go in United Arab Emirates. Who's going to defend United Arab Emirates? What are the capabilities of these countries? Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. What are the capabilities of these countries? They have American bases on their soil. If the president in the United States decides to facilitate that sort of attacks, who's going to go against Israel? Who's going to be able? Who has the power to fight against Israel? Nobody. Because there is no, that's why you see the situation in Lebanon. That's why you see they're destroying not only villages in Lebanon, they're destroying towns. It's not just about Shia regions. It's about Christian regions. It's about everything. Lebanese region. They don't. I think what's the reality, if you want to know what's the strategy of the United States in the region, you have to look what Israel is talking about. No, not what the United States is talking about. Because the Israeli government is deciding about each and every move in the region. That's why Donald Trump is begging. Just imagine, you are the president of the United States, one of the greatest, it was before the rise of China and Russia coming back, the sole superpower. Just imagine, he's begging the president of Israel to pardon Benjamin Netanyahu. What is that? Why does he need to do that? This shows how.
Sorry, go ahead.
Who's in charge? Who has the upper hand?
On the Greater Israel project, now I'm extremely critical of Israel, but there's always the counter argument. First, the UAE, as far as that, the Greater Israel does not reach the UAE, and I think having ambitions that far, the global community won't. There's already a global outcry about Palestine. Not enough of it. There should be more. Sentiment is shifting in the US. So I think a US administration in a few years' time will have a very different policy to Israel. So I think the impunity that Israel had to operate in is not going to last for much longer. And if the countries like the UAE saw Israel as a threat, they would not be doubling down on their relationship with Israel. They see Iran as a bigger threat, closer to the borders. There's the islands that are being disputed. So I think Israel could be seen more of a threat to, obviously, Palestinians and Palestinian land. Lebanon, but Lebanon's also very tricky because on one side, you've got Israel cannot be trusted with their ambitions. Look, they're leveling villages in Lebanon. The other one is Hezbollah is attacking Israel, especially at the interests of Iran. Right after Khamenei was killed, Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel to drag Israel, stretch it thin, to exhaust their air defense system at a time when Hezbollah is already needing to recover. So there's always the counter argument where, yes, there are members of the Israeli cabinet that do believe or want to achieve Greater Israel, which includes surrounding territory. I just don't think that's going to be a long-term threat, especially to countries that are further away. I think Gulf countries see Iran as a bigger threat. Otherwise, they would not be considering normalizing relations with Israel. Now, I think the solution would be the pragmatic solution. They need deterrence against Iran. It is, just geographically speaking, An Iran that controls the Strait of Hormuz is an Iran that controls the economic lifeline. Now, you talked about the swap lines that the UAE has with the US, which is more precautionary, but it's a sign of how dependent other Gulf countries are, even more dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. So you can't expect those Gulf countries to just accept an Iran that controls the Strait of Hormuz.
You know, looking at the last 20, 200 years, Iran has never attacked any country. Has never attacked. Last 200 years. They don't need to attack. They're not looking for, some sort of conflict, attacking other countries, especially its neighbors. They really respect. It's part of Iranian culture. It's part of Iranian culture. It doesn't matter who's running the country, but the revolution, the outcome of the revolution in 1979 is basically right now, they want a better relationship with the whole region. But that's not going to happen. Let's see the Iranian reaction to, I told you about Iran, how Iran supported Kuwait against Iraq. The other point was the way that Saudi Arabia, together with other countries, UAE, tried to put pressure on Qatar, the blockade on Qatar. Who supported Qatar? Who supported in that region? It was Iran and Turkey. These two countries tried to help Qatar.
But that's because strategically it made sense. For me, even Kuwait's support, the support to Kuwait to weaken Iraq, isn't it more strategic decisions by Iran rather than Iran trying to do the right thing? I'm not saying, I don't want to paint Iran as a good country or bad country. Things are not as simple, but it's more Iran looking in at its own interests when making these decisions.
Sure. Every country behaves in a way that to benefit from the sort of a strategy it has. But the strategy doesn't mean that necessarily they made this strategy based on the benefit. No. Because if it was because of the benefit, Iran would never support Lebanon, would never support Gaza, would never, the only country that is supporting Gaza actively with each and every power it has is Iran right now. What is the benefit out of Gaza and Palestine for Iran? Just tell me what benefit for Iran.
Weakening their main rival. So two countries that are trying to try to become dominant players in the region are Israel and Iran, and of course Saudi. And Iran's biggest rival is Israel. So one way to weaken their rivals
Why
to do it
Israel is a rival of Iran? Why
network.
do you feel that Israel is a rival of Iran? In what sense Israel is a rival? Look at the territory, look at the population, look at the economy, look at the, Iran produces more than 90% of what it uses, the food that it uses, more than 90%. Iranian economy is dependent on oil and this export of oil and gas, 20%, 20 to 30%. Iran is not comparable with Israel. Even if the United States wasn't in this fight, if Israel decided to attack Iran without the United States, Iran doesn't consider Israel as a threat. Israel is nothing militarily compared to Iran. Nothing, Mario, because it's not about the air power. We've learned that in Ukraine. It's about how much power you have on the ground. That's why the United States is failing against Iran, because they're not capable of fighting Iran on the ground. Russia's winning in Ukraine because they're capable. Since they won, they were fighting Ukraine on the ground. Yeah, it was Air Force coming, drones are hitting the targets, but the main concept is on the ground, capturing the land and fighting on the ground. Israel is not it's not comparable. Israel cannot fight one of the provinces of Iran.
But Israel managed to, when was the last time an Iranian fighter jet was over Israel? So I think Iran won strategically, but I think but that's not comparing apples and apples. That's comparing apples and oranges, because considering the military might of the US versus Iran, it's much smaller military. Iran won because the US did not achieve their objectives, and the outcome is disastrous for the US. But if you compare apples and apples, I think, yes, Iran could cause significantly more damage to Israel by just exhausting them with missiles. but I wouldn't just dismiss Israel and their capability to, hack into Iranian systems, be able to monitor all their commanders, the decapitation strike we saw in the 12-day war. So I wouldn't just dismiss Israel. I don't think Israel should be a threat to Iran, but Iran, if that's not the case, why would Khomeini call Israel a cancerous tumor that must be removed? Why should Khamenei, the supreme leader that was just killed this year, the Zionist regime is a cancerous tumor and must be uprooted and destroyed? Israel must disappear. Israel will not exist in 25 years. Why have that rhetoric? Because you're saying he doesn't see Israel as a threat. Why approach it with that rhetoric? And another counter argument as well is that Iran is defending Lebanon and Palestine. A lot of people in Lebanon that hate Israel, which is the majority of Lebanese, they also say, we don't want Iran in our country either. Iran has offered justification for Israel to be able to invade our country. Without Iran, then Israel would not have enough justification to commit the atrocities they're committing right now. So there is a counterpoint to that as well.
Just mentioning your last point, it reminds me of some Iranians in diaspora, these monarchists who are talking about, why do we need missiles and drones? Why are not friendship and going lovely with these guys? No, this is not the reality. Those Lebanese people who are thinking that Iran is, they hate, you said they hate Israel, but they don't want Iran to be. Who's going to support Hezbollah? Hezbollah right now, as we talk, they're using FPV drones to destroy Merkava tanks and
successfully,
Israeli forces. They're just hitting them the way that they've never seen this before coming from Hezbollah, because they thought that they can go there, they can destroy everything as they did in Gaza, and nobody going to respond to them. But that's not the reality. Why is Hezbollah capable of responding to? Because of the partnership, because there's Iran is supporting Hezbollah. That's the reason. I compare those Lebanese people to Iranian in diaspora, these monarchists who are talking about Iran doesn't need military, doesn't need. No, this doesn't make sense. This is not the reality.
They think the Lebanese military should be armed, but they believe Hezbollah should be part of the Lebanese military. They just don't think they don't want a military group, and I think you'd agree with that. They don't want a military group in their country that has allegiance to two sides, because Hezbollah has allegiance to Lebanon and Iran. I think how much allegiance to each could be debated, but they do have allegiance to both.
But the problem is that the system that the French government created in Lebanon is one of the greatest problems right now. And they say the prime minister and president should be Christian, and the head of parliament, Muslim, or could be Shia. What is that? What is that? Who's going to define that? You just imagine here in Brazil, someone says, the president just can be a Christian Catholic, cannot be evangelical. It's just unbelievably amazing how they impose this sort of.
Lebanon's a mess.
It's unbelievable. Let me bring the point. Okay. Let me bring the point about what the Iranian supreme leader said about Israel, and why is he feeling that way? Because Israel is an apartheid state, Mario. Those Palestinian people in Israel are second, they're not the resident as the Israelis who came from Poland, from Europe, from the eastern part of Europe. They have the upper hand. Even those those Jewish people who belong to the region, from Iraq, from Iran, and they're not having the higher rank positions in Israel. They're basically Ashkenazi Jews are running the show in Israel. And the Palestinian people are second-hand citizens. And that's the reality. That's why the Iranian supreme leader said this. They're talking about Israel as a political system, is an apartheid system. That's why they're talking about one-state solution. That could be the whole region. It could be all the Jewish people in the region together with Muslim, because these people were, living together for centuries, for 1,000 years. They know how to live together. It's not just about, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. It's about, look at Iran today. We have these communities for such a long time. They've been living with each other. We have Jewish people, Christian, Muslim, Zoroastrians. No, this is the land. This is an ancient land. All of that, from Iran going to Lebanon, it's an ancient land. All these people were, once they were Zoroastrian, then Christians, then Jewish, Christian, Muslim. It's the same people at the end.
Mm.
But they're making these, those people, those decision makers, those people who are, basically, when you talk about Benjamin Netanyahu as the one of the main reason that Israel is the way that it is today, the guy is not even Jewish. He's not practicing anything. He doesn't belong to any religion. This is the political. That's why Iran is against Zionism, because they don't see Zionism being connected to a religion. Zionism is not Jewish, is not Christian, is not.
It's a political movement.
It's a political movement, and it is a racist movement. That it is the Zionism that created this apartheid system in Israel.
Yeah,
this is not. That's why Iran says that this system should be. They have to bring down this political system that they have created in Israel. This is, the objective of what Iranian supreme leaders said is this is not just about Israel as a country or Israeli people, Jewish people being killed. That's nonsense. We have Jewish people in Iran for 1,000 years. They're living all together, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I made a post a few weeks ago. I said throughout this entire war, there's X thousands of people, Jews living in Iran, and there's been no attacks, no retaliatory attacks against them in Iran whatsoever.
Do you know who attacked them? Do you know who attacked them?
I saw the
Israel
report.
attacked them. They attacked the synagogue in Iran.
Yeah, I saw that. So I made a post on this. And a lot of people responded. They're like, "There's Jews in Iran." They were surprised by it. How is Iran not killing them? So because there's that mindset in a lot of the world that Iran hates Jews. There's also a gentleman a rabbi I had on the show who told me about how he went to Iran, he spoke to the leaders there, etc. So I think religions get hijacked by different countries to advance their own interests.
You're talking about Yaakov Rapkin.
Could be, yes, I think so.
Yaakov Rapkin. Yeah, I
had him last week or two. Yeah, he's great. Nima, really appreciate you coming on the show. By the way, a piece of Rabbi Elhan Beck. Sorry, different person.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the piece of information came. Iran expects, as we wrap up, Iran expects the US to attack it soon, according to Fars. Deputy Inspector of the Khatam al-Arabiya Center headquarters, Jafar Asadi, says a renewed conflict between Iran and the US is likely, and evidence has shown that the US does not adhere to any agreement. The actions and statements of the US officials are mostly media-driven, primarily aimed at preventing a surge in oil prices, and secondly, to escape the predicament they themselves have created. The armed forces are fully prepared for any new American adventurism and recklessness. Nima, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you. My pleasure, Mario.
Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Nima. I highly recommend you check out his channel. He does a lot of the same interviews. He's very, very eloquent, very well educated, very knowledgeable. So highly recommend you check it. I'll be going live again in a few minutes. I'm just going to take a quick break and I'll give you guys a news recap for the day just so you're in the loop. And then we have another interview afterwards. We have two more interviews today, Colonel Daniel Davis and Larry Johnson later in the evening. So I'll see you soon for the new recap. Bye.